It was the 12th of April 2013. I was working at a local branch of a national TV news organization. We were probably the third largest newsroom in West Virginia at the time. I was mainly working as a news writer, but I helped with assignment editing for our reporters. Whenever we had something big coming up, I got called up just after midnight, all hands on deck, just from the way they talked to us and the urgency in their voices. I thought we were looking at another 911. I was fully expecting something vast and catastrophic. When I got to the station, I didn't know what to believe. The parking lot was packed, but I didn't see anyone resembling police or FBI vehicles. I did recognize the symbols from the USACE, United States Army Corps of Engineers and EPA Environmental Protection Agency, though at this point, I thought we were looking at a natural disaster. I was ushered inside by a strange man in rough denim jeans, a flannel shirt, and some kind of Bluetooth headset. He was clearly supposed to look like a civilian, but everything about his demeanor screamed military. The determined eyes, the no questions asked kind of demeanor. There was no point in questioning him. These people were brick walls. The newsroom looked different in the dark. Everything does. The shadows were longer, and everything had a slight echo to it. Maybe the sounds just weren't soaked up as quickly by the background noise. There weren't enough chairs for everyone, so some people were sitting on the floor. I was in the back, leaning against the wall next to my fellow news writers, Ben and Erica. Last names withheld. We were all a bit worked up and anxious, but Erica couldn't turn herself off. She was always working and always making mental notes. "Not everyone's here," she whispered. "What?" "We're missing people," she repeated. "We're missing a live camera crew." She was right. Peter usually did live camera coverage. He worked closely with Noel, who was also nowhere to be seen. Literally everyone but those two were there. Noel usually did night and early morning coverage, so I expected her to be front and center. They were working up in Juniper. Ben asked, "Got a call from a local. Something happened up there." I asked, "Wildfire?" No, nothing like that, no." Ben shook his head. "No idea what, though. Something down in that valley." Erica shrugged. We'd never seen anything like this. A woman in a pantsuit walked in, and two men stepped up to block the exit. We'd never seen any of these people before. We usually use this room for morning briefings, but without the murmur of people sipping their morning coffee, the room seemed more sinister. The pantsuit woman held several folders and kept talking to someone over her earpiece. Out of all the people in the room, she seemed to be the one with the most answers. As to demand our attention, she slammed the folders down on the front desk card. The room fell silent. "There is a situation developing in Greenbrier Valley," the woman said. "There has been a small earthquake. There are no casualties. In many ways, this is an insignificant event in and of itself. How your news team even heard about it is beyond our comprehension." Erica gave a knowing smile. People around the valley loved Noelle and her early morning segments. She had the most recurrent viewers by a large margin. If something happened around the valley, she'd know about it. "Since this is a matter of national interest," she continued, "we've had to clamp down to control the spread of information. We don't want to cause any unnecessary grievances. If it's such a small deal, why go to all this trouble?" "One of our editors," Charlie said. She never knew when to stay quiet. The woman in the pantsuit stopped, considered the question, and took a deep breath. I could tell she was stressed. It's a developing situation. It might have some impact on the local wildlife. Hence the presence of our friends at the USACE and the EPA. "And what organization are you representing?" Charlie continued. She just couldn't help herself from asking questions. The woman in the pantsuit might have tolerated a single interruption, but not two. One of the armed men covering the door walked up to Charlie, grabbed her by the arm, and lifted her to her feet. "I'm just asking who you're working with." Charlie scoffed. "Is that a problem? Is there a problem telling me who we're working with?" She refused to budge. The man tried to pull her away, but she twisted herself loose and stepped back. There was a murmur as we could see things escalate from frustration to potential confrontation. "Just tell us," Charlie continued. "Are you with a DNRNA?" Why aren't you answering my question?" The man with the flannel shirt caught up with her, and she put her hands up. With no resistance and no provocation, he pushed her down on one of the tables, face first. He pushed his elbow into her neck, causing her to heave and cough like she was being strangled. He put her in zip ties in a matter of seconds and dragged her out in a show of force. Now everyone was off the floor. The crew tried to talk over one another in this storm of complaints and questions. One of the camera operators tried to get out and had a gun pulled on him. Things were escalating fast. It only stopped when the woman in the pantsuit slammed down her folders again for a split second. "I thought it was a gunshot. If we start working together," she began, "y'all might just have a career left by the end of the night. Since cooperation doesn't seem to be a given at this point, we must take some precautions." They took our phones away and patted us down to make sure we didn't have anything hidden. The woman in the pantsuit laid out a bunch of documents for us to sign. We didn't get the time to read them, just a pen to sign them with, and a promise of pain if we refused. Once it was said and done, she left. I never saw her again. Over the next hour, they brought in more people, 2 more cars of armed guards dressed in civilian outfits. Once they took us out of the meeting room, we were divided into 3 different teams. Marcus, our news director, was completely sidelined. Quarantined, sort of. There was no clear organizational structure. It was all ordered remotely. We could hear the various agents receive instructions from an off-site central command. Something down in Greenbrier Valley, we suspected. A man arrived just past 2 in the morning. He was in his early 70s and dressed in a cheap navy blue suit, but I could tell he was the one to keep my eyes on. The other agents seemed to pay special attention to him. He had this goofy little sunflower pin on his collar, something old and corporate. We were dragged back into the meeting room as the guards started handing out folders. "All right, well, we got 3 possible developments," the old man said. "All equally possible, and we need to be prepared for each of them. There will be more people coming in through the night, and you'll be expected to stay here for the next 16 hours minimum." There were no questions. We hadn't seen Charlie since she was carried off. They'd talked to Marcus about it, and ever since, he'd been quiet. This was a man who was usually standing at the front of the room, barking orders and taking charge. Now he looked like a beaten puppy. "Those of you with green folders are to stay right here," the old man continued. "Blue folders need to go with the gentleman by the door. Red folders, you're coming with me." All news writers got differently colored folders. I got a red folder. It was ominous, to say the least. We were taken into one of the back rooms, along with an armed contingency. There was a seal on the folder, and I didn't want to take a chance on breaking it. A reporter, a video editor, an assignment editor. 3 people from the production crew, and one of the anchors. I can't tell you the name, but you'd recognize him if you lived in West Virginia in the 2010s. We all sat down around a small table. The old man followed us there, reminding us about the NDA we'd been forced to sign. Once we were all behind closed doors, he had the guards waiting for him outside. For a moment, it was just the old man and us. "I need your absolute discretion on this topic," he said. "You can read your briefing." We broke the seals and went through our folders, page after page of details, pictures, graphs, and statistics. Mine was about diamondback rattlesnakes, how there was an aggressive and invasive brood, and how people were supposed to stay far away from the lakes near Greenbrier Valley because of them. Something about an urgent call for people to stay out of various underground caves and to not be alarmed by the presence of wildlife specialists in the area. It all seemed hastily prepared. One of the editors raised his hand, and the old man allowed him to speak. "Yeah, this doesn't make any sense," said the editor. You know, there's no diamondbacks like that around here, right? Doesn't matter." "You're gonna have to report it," the old man replied. No, I mean, like, this is a lie. It's fiction. They're native to, like, Georgia. Doesn't matter what it is and what it isn't. You're reporting it," the old man replied again. "But I'm telling you, people are going to notice. They'll believe whatever we damn well tell them to believe," the old man replied. He slammed his hand down hard. We all recoiled as one of the guards opened the door. He was waved aside, and the door promptly closed. As tempers cooled, The old man stepped outside to have a smoke. The rest of us were left to discuss on our own for a while. We compared notes, and we weren't thrilled about the implications. This was clearly a worst-case scenario kind of folder. And while the whole story about enraged rattlesnakes were fiction, it still highlighted something. If this scenario took place, there'd be armed guards surrounding a massive area. They spoke of a possible controlled burning of the undergrowth and closing several large roads. About 36 homes would have to be evacuated, minimum. But it wasn't even about what they were saying. It was about what they weren't saying. This was clearly not about rattlesnakes. So what the hell were they afraid of, whatever it was? It was bad enough for them to threaten to burn down several acres of forest in the Lewisburg area. Then I saw the eyes of our news anchor go wild. "There's timestamp," he said. "This one is in 4 hours." To put that whole plan into action with such short notice, they had to already have put things into motion. When the old man returned, we were again separated and told to start working on the news segment. I was to write it up and summarize it, using the provided information and quotes to make it cohesive. There were some pictures and videos handed to our video editor. Our news anchor was told to perform a mock interview with a supposed snake expert who could explain the situation. It was actually just one of the guards. Sitting in the adjacent room with a walkie-talkie, we were going to pre-record it all, so that the segment could be played if a sudden evacuation was necessary. I found it strange, considering our station was nowhere near the area that efficiently needed to be evacuated, according to their own fictional scenario. There was something else brewing. I managed to catch a glimpse of Erica, and we exchanged a look across the hall. I asked one of the armed guards if I could use the restroom. He didn't seem to mind, but told me he'd check in on me in a few minutes. I excused myself. I met Erica in the bathroom. I could tell she was flustered. She kept washing her hands, as if trying to keep herself occupied. "What did you get?" I whispered. "What did they tell you?" "They say they're hunting an escaped convict. Armed and dangerous, you." "Rattlesnakes. Diamondback rattlesnakes." Yeah," I replied. "Rattlesnakes." We compared notes. The stories provided were completely different, but they had something in common. Evacuation of an area and the presence of armed guards. Both could also be a future explanation for possible civilian injuries. What changed was the scale. Erica's story was much smaller in scope and somewhat more believable. Mine would have the same effect, but to a much larger area. Also, her story didn't involve setting fire to parts of the valley. It did mention locking doors, though, and not picking up hitchhikers. Erica was dumbfounded. She walked back and forth, scratching her head. "What the hell is this? Weren't they telling us?" "Yeah, this is not the time to ask questions," I replied. "We got to stay low on this." "But this is bullshit," she wheezed. "What the hell are we going to lie about next? Bigfoot? The chupacabra? The red piper birds that trick kids into the woods?" "I don't know," I replied. "But it doesn't matter. We can't do shit right now." Erica didn't like it, but she knew I was right. And to be fair, that red piper bird story has some merit to it. I know a guy. Our time was up, and we were moved to different rooms. I was plopped down in front of a laptop with a guard supervising my actions. They pulled our Wi-Fi, but I started sketching up a segment about the supposed Diamondback outbreak. Every paragraph was reviewed, and there was no revision. Everything was immediately sent to the studio or sent back with a list of notes. There were protests from the crew, but they were quickly silenced. The video editors had little to nothing to work with, and with Noel and Peter, we knew people would start to ask questions. You can't just have an early morning segment without them about, something so outlandish. Not only were we lying, we were forced to do it badly. It's just a precaution, we were told. That's all there is to it. Precaution. It probably won't even air. People were running all over the place. Some of them were screaming at each other in the corridors. Someone was crying in the bathroom, and a guy from the production crew passed out from the stress. He looked like a ventriloquist dummy, sitting with his eyes half open as he slumped over in the corner. One of our assistants was trying to explain something to a guard and got a right hook straight to the jaw. Things were getting out of hand quickly, and I was under intense pressure to finish my writing. At one point, we were all pulled out of our chairs and pushed up against the wall. When people started protesting, we were all told to be quiet, and for a few minutes you could hear a pin drop and somewhere in the distance a helicopter. The guards started buzzing about. They talked about preparing for something. They brought out a kind of plastic paneling and duct tape from one of their trucks and forced one of the riding teams out of a meeting room on the bottom floor. The helicopter was coming our way. I heard screams about emergency landing as people scrambled to prepare something downstairs. I could see a little from a window on the top floor. I couldn't see where the helicopter landed, but the sound it made was deafening. Even from inside the building, I had to cover my ears. I could see camouflage soldiers bringing something inside, someone screaming at the top of their lungs. A woman, I think. Boil water, someone said. We need to boil water. Towels. We need more towels, yelled another. There was intense debate. Even now, the news anchor was told to keep recording. The old man was debating something over his earpiece. I couldn't quite make it out, but I heard some colors mentioned. It seemed that the red folder would be the likely outcome. Then, at some point, it sounded like the red folder wouldn't be enough. They were already talking extensions and further contingencies. At one point, while the initial parts of the segments were exported for review, the old man pulled me aside. I was taken downstairs closer to the screaming and put in a small side room. I'm going to be honest with you, he said as we shuffled down the stairs. We might have to go off script on this one. There were no more physical folders to distribute, but they called this theoretical contingency the violet folder. It was just me and Ben working on it, seeing as the first folder had been completely abandoned and we needed a new solid concept. The mildest scenario was no longer plausible, it seemed. The old man sat us down and complained that we needed something to explain a whole new set of events. We're talking maybe 6 or 7 miles of increased radius in each direction. Complete water shutdown for all of Lewisburg for at least 36 hours. Semi-controlled fire at an unprecedented scale, intermittent power outages, waves of ground shocks that can cause everything from traffic distribution to bursting gas and sewage pipes, the old man said. I don't. Where do we start? Asked Ben. The old man threw up his arms in defeat. He looked 10 years older. I don't know, he admitted. I can't. It has to make sense. So just tell him the truth. I said, tell us the truth. We can help. For a moment, I could see he was considering it. He was nodding, looking down and searching for the right words. And then something changed. He held a finger up to his earpiece and his eyes shifted. Someone was talking. Suddenly, he shot out of his chair. You're not bringing them here. He told someone on the other end. We have civilians. You can't know. And with that, he ran out of the room. Ben and I just sat there for a while. I tried to imagine what could be happening out there to cause this kind of response. I thought back on what the woman in the pantsuit had said. This is a situation developing in the Greenbrier Valley. That is a huge area. Was it that she'd just been unspecific, or was this something that really encompassed the entire valley? Considering I was working on the violet folder, I was starting to consider the latter. I don't know what to do, Ben admitted. There's nothing like this that I've worked on. I mean, none of us have. I added water. Power plumbing. Did he say earthquakes? Earth shocks, nodded Ben. Not earthquakes, but like a series of aftershocks. How do those come about? I asked. What the hell do we say? I'm not a geologist, Ben said. The helicopter was leaving, but something was happening outside. People were going quiet in the hallways. From the safety of our little room, we could hear them bringing something in, something being rolled on squeaky wheels. Ben was about to peek out, but I pulled him back. We weren't getting involved. Not on my watch. The screaming woman had gone quiet. Maybe she'd passed out. I could hear something banging on metal. A gargle followed by a snake-like hiss. Squeaking wheels kept turning as something was slowly being pushed through the building. Then another banging sound followed by a snap. Everything fell deathly quiet. A second later, chaos, gunshots, screams. Screeching metal, wood breaking, glass shattering, automatic gunfire. Hundreds of rounds sprayed in all directions. As the gunfire died down, I could hear people running, scrambling for safety, doors being slammed shut with desperate voices calling out for barricades and ammunition. There's still people out there. A muffled voice came through. Get 'em out of there. And then a completely alien noise. The best way I can describe it is a rattled breath. The same kind of rattle you hear when a big wasp struggles against a glass window, but bigger and organic. It was rhythmic, like someone taking deep, wounded breaths. Then there was a clicking, sharp, dolphin-like clicking. It bounced against the walls, forcing an echo. It was such a sharp sound that it tickled my inner ear, making my head spin. I heard footsteps, several pairs, multiple individuals, and they were coming our way. Our room was just a little meeting room. A table with a set of laptops, 5 office chairs, 2 fake plants, and a gray carpet. That was it. But I got the feeling that if whatever was out there made its way in here, we'd be in trouble. This had to be the answer to whatever was happening down in the valley. And whatever it was, that sound was going to haunt my nightmares. I pointed at the light switch, but Ben didn't get the hint. I tried waving my hand around, and that seemed to do the trick. He snapped back to reality, killed the light, and we both crawled under the table. Moments later, something wet slapped against the door. Ben covered his mouth to stifle a scream. I could still hear him whimper. Another slap against the door, this one higher up. I could hear another set of footprints further off, counting at least 3 individuals in total, and then creaking metal. The handle was turning. Ben couldn't shut up. He was on the cusp of hyperventilation, and it seemed to just be a matter of time. You got to stop, Ben, I whispered. You got to stop, okay? Just stop. I can't. I can't, Tino. No, I got worse. I put my hand over his mouth, forcing it shut. I could feel his hot breath on my fingers. The door handle turned as something wet slapped its way into our room, only slightly muffled by the carpet. More clicking. More rattled exhales. Something viscous and warm dropping onto the floor in chunks. I could feel Ben's breathing growing more and more irregular. Faster. Something slammed down on the table above us, and Ben couldn't help it. He helped for a moment. Everything was silent. Every room, every guard, every vehicle outside. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my face started feeling warm. And then one of the office chairs was flung across the room, hissing, angry, animalistic hissing, and suddenly Ben shuddered. It's standing on my foot. It's standing on my foot. Ben said as he grabbed a hold of me, and in the next breath, he was pulled out from under the table. He wasn't even screaming anymore, just wailing like a frightened child struggling to understand his lungs. I heard something heavy come down on him over and over, like a primate trying to crush a watermelon. Temporary lapses in his breathing as his ribs were crushed. Something snapping as his arm was twisted out of its socket. Drops of something warm, spattering, hitting me across the face and the right side of my arm. I could have stayed. I could have hoped that they'd move on. And yet something in the back of my mind was telling me to run. So I did. Even in the dark, I knew this place by heart. I scrambled out from under the table, burst through the door, and headed straight for the exit. A dozen voices screamed at me from a dozen directions. Go, come on. This way. Don't look back. Stay low. Stay low. Something was panting, trying to catch up. Something wet. I could feel it brush against the back of my head, pulling away a handful of strands of hair. The front doors opened as the man in the flannel shirt pulled me out. Gunfire echoed as whatever had been behind me retreated into the dark. I only caught a glimpse of him. Slick-oiled, black skin, eyes like a shark, deep and unfeeling rows of syringe-like teeth. Roughly humanoid, but only by shape. Someone yelled out that they got one. Emboldened, doors started to open. More gunfire, screams, and flashes of light. Yet all I could concentrate on was the deep, dark blood covering my hands, still dripping from my face. After that, things went fast. I was pulled out and examined. They went for the segment about the escaped convict, claiming at least one known victim, Ben. They kept the story small and local. If you live in the area back in 2013, It is possible you might have caught it on the morning and afternoon news on April 12th, a short mention of it on the 13th. We were under strict control, and they weren't kidding around when it came to threats. They made it very clear that a single word about this would not only jeopardize our career, but our very lives. It's been 10 years. I've changed a few locations, a few names, and a few details, but the gist of it's right there. Maybe they're still checking in on us from time to time to see if we're behaving. I don't think they are. I'm making this as a sort of witness to what really happened that day. There was no escaped convict, no knife attacks, but people did die that day, and I still haven't got the faintest clue as to why. But I won't forget. I can't. And you'll never find me anywhere near West Virginia again. People forget how much overlap NASA has with the military. I see all these talks about building habitats in Nevada to test how people cope with isolation during space travel. All I can do is laugh. They spend millions on PR stunts to show that every astronaut's life is a precious resource. It's all for show. I know what goes on behind the photo ops. Do you know what a general's answer is when asked? Can a single human endure months of isolation on a cramped moon base? I can personally say that the response is let's find out. And that's what my mission boiled down to. When the time came, the base was dropped onto the far side of the moon. They made sure it was out of sight of anyone's space program. I was shipped out a few months later. On what was supposedly an unmanned flight, they hid me in a secret compartment the size of a broom closet. I had been chosen not because I was the most qualified, but because I had no family and no public profile. My job wasn't to be some cutting-edge super scientist. I was more of a lab monkey to scrape specimens and put dust in jars. They had the habitat. They had the rockets. They even had upcoming missions that were going to pass the moon. The only problem was finding someone expendable. And oh boy was I expendable. The deal was, if it worked out, I'd get fast-tracked as a real deal astronaut. Never mind the exams I'd failed 10 times over. They told me they'd figured it out. If not, well, they lost the habitat and a man who wasn't worth much to begin with. Of course, they had a lot of other grunts they could have picked from, but I had a psychological assessment that listed me as extremely comfortable with isolation. And even now, I'll admit that that part of the experience didn't bother me. Neither the journey there, nor the loneliness upon arrival did much to affect me. It was color, not company, that I missed the most. My life became grayscale, and after a month began to bother me deeply. There was no sunrise and a permanent black sky, and with no atmosphere, the sun was a bleached golf ball in the sky. The habitat I lived in was a single room, inflatable, done in white. My uniform was a dull navy blue. The few possessions I had became important to me for unexpected reasons. My favorite was a book with a bright red cover. After the A3 read, I pinned it to a corkboard like a poster. You'd think TV would help, but it just wasn't enough. I didn't want a little box that showed me images of images. I wanted the actual green of trees, the brown earth, and the blue ocean. By the end of the first month, I was so desperate for color that I started dissecting my food packets. HQ was worried, and it showed. I think they were worried that the isolation was affecting me. It wasn't. I was fine, but I didn't protest too much. I just wanted to get out there and take a look. Now, my first trip was meant to be to a nearby crater. I was to take some samples from an ancient asteroid impact that may or may not have relevance to life on Earth. I didn't really care. I was in it for the walk, for the exploration. It was every bit as breathtaking as I'd hoped. I saw a huge desert of silver. It was an ocean's worth of sandy glass. Its surface was only broken by craters, hills, and valleys. I felt like a child exploring my own backyard again. I was easily impressed by the discovery of a funny-shaped rock or by a small ditch or tall hill. It took me an hour to cover what should have been 20 minutes back on Earth in that bulky suit. It might as well have been a hike up Everest. The real trouble was staying upright with each step. I'd had a lot of time in the habitat to get used to my movement in low gravity, but it didn't translate very well once in the suit. When I wanted to admire the scenery, I had to stop and take it in because I couldn't walk and marvel at the same time. It was because of all this standing around that I noticed the opening in the crater. Something about the darkness in that one particular dip. It seemed different. I think some part of my brain could see something hidden in the dark, and it kept telling me to go closer. So I did. It wasn't really a crater. It was more like a ditch, small compared to the other craggy impact sites, almost 10 meters in diameter at most, and with a sharp descent that meant the floor was in permanent darkness. I think that's how all those satellite photos of the moon missed this strange formation. Well, that is the fact that it was tiny. It was a hole, maybe even a doorway. It was cut into the sloping surface of the ditch, about 2 meters tall, with a rounded top. It wasn't quite smooth enough to look artificial, but it wasn't rough enough to be written off as a standard cave opening. It reminded me of old churches and crumbling Greek ruins. Unfortunately, it was only me who could see it. I couldn't transmit real-time video unless the orbiter was directly above me. I had to rely on audio with a minor delay. I knew this was going to be a difficult conversation, and I briefly looked up at the sky, hoping I might see the orbiter's lights winking overhead. At least that way I could send some photos. Mission Control, this is Lieutenant Gans. Are you reading this? I spoke into the mic. Lieutenant Gans, this is Mission Control. We can read you. How's the moonwalk? HQ replied back. I think I found a door. Silence. When HQ came back, they made sure to say each word slowly. Lieutenant Gans, I'm being advised you should return to the module. We are currently arranging for support staff. Yeah, I don't need a therapist, I said, angry about their doublespeak. They clearly thought I was nuts out of spite. I started climbing down the crater's edge. Look, I'm telling you, I'm looking at a doorway. I'm sending my coordinates now, and I'm letting you know I'm going in. Lieutenant Gans, you are being instructed to return. They kept rambling. I wasn't in control of my suit's communication functions. Maybe if I behaved better during the first month or two, it would have been different, but it annoyed me, at least until I'd walked a few steps through the doorway. All of a sudden, the voices just cut off. I wasn't quite sure what to think about. On the one hand, the silence was a relief. On the other hand, well, I turned and looked back at the opening, and I saw the brightly lit crater's edge. It called me to the promises of safety and routine. But the darkness ahead, it called to me with an entirely different promise. Hadn't I wanted this? Hadn't I wanted adventure? I kept going, and the walls became more regular. They grew smoother and cleaner the deeper I went. It became harder and harder to pretend this was a natural formation. Who'd made it? It came as a strange relief. When the tunnel ended, my heart pounding, I stepped out into a cavern not much larger than a typical feeder. The crisp white walls reflected my light so much that there was enough to see all around me, and in the center of it all, I found something that defied belief. Well, it almost looked Roman. For ancient pillars stood in varying states of decay. One was perfectly preserved, while the others were only 3/4 as high. As I walked closer, the ground turned into something like polished marble. It looked like a rectangular Roman bath had been dug straight out of the ground, and the pool itself was filled with a bright red liquid. I couldn't have told you what it was then, nor could I say much more now. It was a thick fluid that didn't reflect any light. It was perfectly smooth, and it looked almost like plastic. It made me think of dried candle wax, except for the constant ripples across its surface. But there was no wind here, not down there or anywhere else on that rock. As I looked closer, I could see veins within the liquid, a network of barely visible lines that flashed like lightning in a storm. It was deeper than I thought. Did something swim in those waters? I squinted, and I noticed a pale yellow membrane covered the entire thing like oil. It seemed slick but dry. It was incredible. And terrifying. Maybe even a little disgusting, too. Why was it here? Who made this? Had they carved the tunnel and the ancient pillars, too? I ran a finger across the nearest column and was surprised to find it had the texture of wet sand. My finger left a slight dent in its surface, but it didn't collapse. What did that mean? Are they made of moon dust like a sand castle? Something about this place felt sinister the longer I stayed here. I began to walk backward, away from it all, and a bubble started forming on the pool's surface. I backed away faster. I wanted to turn, but I couldn't bring myself to let it out of sight. The bubble only continued to inflate, growing just enough time to keep it visible as I backed away. My hand touched the entrance to the arch. I'd finally reached the edge, but my feet tripped on the uneven ground. In the suit, even the slightest tumble was nearly catastrophic, and I fell backwards. And as I went low, I lost sight of the red bubble. It responded with a sudden and violent shiver. Something that looked like a giant tongue leapt over the pool's edge and slapped onto the sand, and fear took over. With a desperate struggle, I flipped myself over, and I began to crawl, then half run and half stumble into an upright jog. I grabbed at the tunnel walls with my hands. I ignored every bump as my suit hit solid rock. At the very least, HQ was back on the comms. I pinned into the mic. You guys need to see this. The photos were hard to argue with. They tried at first. The most popular theory was that they were photorealistic paintings I'd made using food as pigment, but spectral analysis disproved it. The photos from my in-suit camera were real. The pool and whatever lay inside it were real. They wanted samples. They wanted photos. They wanted readings. They wanted half the habitat's various instruments dragged out and put in the cavern. In short, they wanted me to suddenly develop and exercise skills they'd never taught me in a span of time no one could possibly hope to do it in. Half a dozen scientists were making requests every few minutes, but I couldn't help but think they didn't really care about my place in all this. They didn't care about me even one little bit. There was never any acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made or the risks I'd taken, not even after I'd found an actual alien. So I made a calm and reasonable explanation of what missions I would be willing to accept. These boiled down to maybe taking some samples, but even then I had to be threatened with a court-martial. I could collect some of the rocks, dust, maybe even some of the strange columns, but they wanted a piece of whatever was in that pool. I didn't tell Cubus, but I hadn't slept since I saw that thing. I kept thinking, what would it look like outside the pool? What did it want? The threat of punishment is what finally made me suit up for another moonwalk. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad since I knew what to expect now. But it turns out I wouldn't even get to the cavern. The first thing I saw when I stepped out was a trail of sticky red footprints. They stood in front of the habitat's only exit. 2 perfect impressions of bare human feet. And they weren't walking towards the habitat. They started right on my doorstep, and they headed away from me. Wherever they led, it wasn't in the direction of the cavern I'd already visited either, and I started following them. It was a long walk, longer than I should have been willing to go out on my own. Whoever left those footprints didn't seem to have any trouble. If I had to guess, it almost looked like they'd been dancing. At last, the footsteps stopped at some strange ruins. It was another pool, only larger and more elaborate. There were dozens of columns and a roof. There were even carvings of vines. And on the edge of the pool was a red woman. No suit, only a plain robe made of the same red material as her flesh. Her legs were partially submerged in the same red fluid I'd found in that other pool. As I got closer, it became obvious that her body blended perfectly with a strange liquid. She was made of this stuff. Once I was closer, she patted the ledge. She wanted me to sit, but it was far too close to that pool. I shook my bulky head for a moment. I wondered what I must look like to her. A giant golden faceplate, nervously saying no. With a playful smile, she reached over and touched the boot of my suit so quickly I didn't even have time to react. "What a funny thing you are," she said. "What are you?" I stammered. "A god." She smiled, and I believed her instantly. "What do you want?" I asked. "To play." She smiled again. Something about her expression was unnerving. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But beneath that beauty lay something else. I couldn't quite explain it. She made me feel like an insect. "What does that mean?" I asked. "I want." She made a funny expression, something almost playful. "I want to make a garden out of you." I stepped back, and her arms stretched easily toward me, breaking any illusion that she was human. Behind her, the ruins collapsed without a sound. They disintegrated completely in seconds, only leaving behind the pool itself. As she reached towards me, her hands split apart. Her liquid flesh slowly began to cover my visor. "Stop," I cried. "No," she replied as the light in the helmet faded. "You are much more exciting than this prison. The electricity in your nervous system, the tension in your muscle fibers, the pattern of your bones. Now that my exile is finally over, I want to make art out of you all." I fell backwards. She laughed, and I began to crawl away, expecting her to follow, but she just stood still. With her hands on her hips, she kept laughing at my desperate attempts to get away. Panic made me clumsy. I took longer than I should have, and when I finally managed to roll onto my front and get back on my feet, I turned to look behind me. She disappeared into nothingness. Her, the ruins, and the pool. I don't remember much of the walk back, only the constant feeling of the red woman watching me. But I do remember the moment when I finally returned to my habitat and I found that the airlock was wide open, and I was hit with a sudden realization that I hadn't heard anyone on my comm since I'd left. No one knows exactly what happened during my walk. Not exactly. A lot of my in-suit functions failed right around the time she touched my boot. Images and sound recordings were wiped. For a few fleeting moments, she had access to my radio. No one really knows what she said to HQ when she did. The military had clamped down on security during my second moonwalk. They'd cleared out the comms rooms and reduced the staff to an absolute bare minimum. A colonel, 2 comms specialists, and a senior scientist. They were the only people present when the red woman spoke. By the time I got back to the habitat, they'd all killed themselves. At the time, I didn't know any of this. I had my own problems back on the moon. Inside my habitat, I found red handprints all over the place. It was so thoroughly contaminated that I left my suit on as I made notes of what she touched. I had to assume this thing was made up of the fluid. Did that mean the traces of fluid left on my belongings were still part of her? I wondered. My initial thought was to burn everything she touched, but she touched so much that that wasn't even an option. I'd have nothing to eat with, nowhere to sleep. Suddenly, it made a lot of sense why she'd lured me miles out into the middle of nowhere for our conversation. She wanted me far away while she played with my stuff. Weirdly, I thought most of the prints would be on my equipment, but she'd shown a disturbing interest in personal items like dirty clothes and unwashed dishes. Anything, I suppose, with an organic trace. For the first time in weeks, I wanted to hear from HQ. Of course, at the time they had other things to worry about, like removing the bodies from the comms room. I tried to get through, but no one responded. I looked at my supplies, all of them covered in her dripping red prints, and I realized I wouldn't be able to eat any of it. And what about water? A single drop of her could be in the tank. Would I even know? I gagged at the thought of having any of that liquid in me. I sat on my bed, checked my air supply, and I went over my options. And then 2 things happened. That took my mind off a slow and painful death on the moon. First, my radio came to life. I was informed that I was to begin the evacuation procedure immediately. I need to hike to the lunar landing module and from there reinitiate the computer that could begin the launch sequence. The orbiter wasn't quite in the right place for it, but I just have to wait it out on the lander until the 2 modules align. It would take a few hours, but I wasn't going to complain. The second thing that happened was that as I listened to the instructions from my commanding officer, the steady dripping came from the nearest window. I looked up and I saw the Crimson Woman standing right there, and she grinned at me, baring red teeth, made of flowing cherry red liquid. "What you waiting for?" she mouthed while pointing upwards. "Time to go." I refilled my air supplies. Stepping out into the vacuum once more, I paused and looked around, wondering if she was waiting for me somewhere. It was hard to understand exactly what she might do to me, or even what she wanted. But I didn't feel like sticking around to find out. As soon as I could tell the coast was clear, I began to walk, and it was another tough hike. I was more experienced in the suit now, and that helped, but I was also exhausted and terrified. I was constantly scanning the horizon for the woman while on the move. After a while, I just gave up. When I realized how badly it was slowing me down, Instead, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other and not much else. Still, I kept expecting her to make another appearance or to hear her voice coming through my radio, anything that let me know what she was planning. Would this alien thing finally attack? Was that even what she was? She called herself a god. What would a god do with me? I wondered. Make a garden out of me. My own mind answered. Despite those dark thoughts, I seemed to reach the lander without much incident. I nervously climbed inside. Surely she knew what I was doing. Was she going to try and stop me from escaping? But the process went without incident. The computer initiated, and after a lot of technical radio chatter, the launcher blasted off from the moon's surface using only a fraction of the thrust necessary to leave Earth. I looked back down at the moon's surface with utter relief. I carefully scanned the rapidly shrinking landscape for some sign of glittering red shapes. "Oh, you are so clever," she said. The words were spoken like a pleased mother, but they struck me with the violence of a thrown brick with creeping dread. I turned back and faced her, and this time she was smaller. She was sitting like a tiny red fairy. On one of the many glowing computer screens, she was looking around and marveling at the lander's interior. When he told me what he planned for this world, I really didn't expect it to come to this. I thought he might get a nervous system, maybe even a few organized insects. But well, what can I say? He got it right. Joke's on him, though. He's not around anymore, but I am, and I am so excited to return to the world I was exiled from. I realized that a tiny piece of her must have hitched a ride on my suit. "Oh, don't be silly," she said. "You were contaminated the moment you took your suit off in that little bubble thing." Was it true? I wondered. Had I really carried her with me all this time? As I sat still in despair, a streak of light came through the window. The lander had begun to orbit the near side of the moon, and in doing so, I finally got a good look at Earth. It had been so long. "Oh, so beautiful," she said, "and to think I have all the time in the world to play with it." I'm back in my apartment now. The television was broadcasting some sort of press conference. Well, I just think at a time when millions of Americans are suffering from poverty, the idea that the government would spend billions on sending men to the moon. Oh, it's just bizarre. How can we justify this kind of waste when there's so much more potential to be realized down here on Earth? Turn the TV off, and I listened to silence for a few moments. Whoever that politician was, I wondered if he was contaminated or if she just made a particularly convincing argument. In the last few years, it had become obvious to me how subtle her manipulations are. Usually all it took was a word here or there, of course. That didn't mean she wasn't also spreading herself from person to person. "Oh, he's not one of mine," she said, a single red hand appearing on my shoulder then. "Just a very sensible man. Why go playing around on the moon? Such a waste. I was put there as punishment for a reason." It was like taking a tour of a sewage tunnel. "How long is this going to take?" I asked. It had only been a few months since my return, and every single day it felt like a decade spent in hell. I tried to turn my head to get a look at what was happening in my kitchen, but her hand pinned me firmly in place. She rarely even let me move anymore. It was a miracle she even let me keep the remote. Maybe it was for the best I couldn't see. She had successfully lured dozens of people to my home, but I had never once heard any of them leave. Are you asking me what I intend to do to you? Or what I intend to do to your planet? Oh, not long. Her slick hand caressed my cheek, and I suppressed a shiver a couple of centuries at most. Every national park has its fair share of missing persons cases. A lot of them do get a happy ending, but far too many of them stay lost. And that's how the Lady Bluebell program started, as a way to find lost hikers. There were 2 incidents in the program that I've never been able to tell anyone about. For everyone's safety, these 2 are secrets I need to take to my grave. One summer, when I was a kid, my parents drove me out to a nearby national park. They had a junior ranger club where kids were introduced to wildlife knowledge and survival. I wasn't sure about it at first, but I gave it a try. Back in July of '98, all 12 junior rangers set out on a night walk. Along with our guide, we had to pack our own survival kit and make our way to one of the ranger stations. There, we'd unpack and be graded based on what we brought. There was this excitement in the air. It was like a graduation. We were to become official wildlife stewards, as they called it. We paired up in a buddy system and we followed the trail. The man in charge, Ranger Dan, had done that walk every summer for the past 12 years. He was prepared for a lot of things, but nature had other plans that night. I remember him holding up a hand, silently asking us to stop and listen. There was this deep groaning noise somewhere in the dark. I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I saw two glowing eyes in the shine of our flashlights. It was a black bear. My buddy panicked, bolted into the woods. We have to stay together, so I did my best to keep up with him. I yelled at him to stop, but by the time he did, we'd been separated from the rest of the group. I couldn't even see their flashlights anymore. Luckily, the Rangers had the Lady Bluebell system in place all over the park. They'd wrap blue tape around the trees and tie a bell in the direction of the closest ranger station or trail, even in the dark. You could hear a bell go off every now and then, and you could check the bell to get the right directions. We've been taught that if all else fails, all we had to do was follow 3 simple steps. Stop. Listen. Look. Lady Bluebell takes you home. Those were the rules. The first moment when I realized we were lost was horrifying. But I did what I've been told to do. Stop, listen, look. Lady Bluebell would take us home. And I swear, not only did I hear that bell, I saw her, a tall woman in a blue dress off in the distance, a suntanned arm pointing us in the direction of the trail. Long dark hair, framing a brilliant smile. Maybe I remember it wrong. Maybe she wasn't really there. But I think she was. We made our way back to the trail. Not long after that, we spotted flashlights in the distance. The rest of the night was nothing but praise from Ranger Dan, all the hot dogs we could eat, and scary stories around a campfire. I never told anyone about seeing Lady Bluebell. My mom thought that night would scare me away from the junior rangers, but strangely, it had the opposite effect. I used what I'd learned to survive to win, and that's when I knew I wanted to be a park ranger. Nowadays, I'm the one running the Junior Ranger Club. Ranger Dan retired back in 2018, but still volunteers for the club in the summer. I have known the area for over a decade, and I'm confident when I say that I know my way around. I know what animals roam which areas, and I can tell what's coming by the shifting seasons. I know how flash floods smell, and I can tell by the taste of the air when a lightning storm is coming. No, the park has changed a lot, though. The Lady Bluebell program, for example. Over the years, it evolved into a sort of mascot. She was portrayed as this beautiful woman in a blue summer dress. She also had her sidekicks, like the mischievous Ricky Raccoon and Sunny the Sad Sunflower. They hired a woman to dress like her every summer to welcome the junior rangers and teach them the system. There were comic books, trading cards, stamps, and merchandise. But there were issues with overtime. Some visitors to the park began stealing the blue tape as souvenirs. Others just took the bell. Some even moved the bell around, purposely pointing it in the wrong direction over time. The effort required to constantly fix the system started to outweigh the benefits. They eventually ditched the Lady Bluebell takes you home motto and retired the mascot. And I was sad to see her go, but it made sense. It just wasn't practical anymore, you know. So it was late August. I was following our southeastern trail, mapping the movements of an elk herd. The leaves were just about to change color, and there was a hint of cold in the air. Autumn was just around the corner. I was ready to head back when I spotted smoke just off the trail. Nothing big, possibly a campfire. I decided to check it out just in case, and I came upon a small camp. It had a tattered one-man tent in neon orange. There was a hastily constructed campfire with what looked like a grilled squirrel, and I caught a whiff of sweat coming from the tent, giving me the impression that whoever lived here had been here for a while. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone here?" I heard a shout in response and hurried footsteps, someone falling, getting up and sprinting in my direction, and seconds later, a young woman crawled into camp. Her hair, it was a tangled mess, and she was deeply sunburnt. Her lips were dry and pale, and her hands kept shaking. The moment she saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. "Yes," she cried. My God, yes. She got up then and flung her arms around me. Crying onto my shoulder, she tried to say something, but every other word got stuck in her throat. Did I make it? She sniffled. Am I out? I sat her down, offered her some water, and I asked her to explain what happened. "I I just can't believe my luck," she said. "I thought it was all over. Now, nothing has prepared me for this. We weren't out looking for anyone. We hadn't been for months, maybe years." "It's okay," I said. "Let's pack you up and get you home." Her name was Anya Baker. She'd been part of a company retreat and got lost somewhere along the way. She figured she'd been on her own for about 2 weeks, but there was no way to tell for sure. She was malnourished and dehydrated, and I didn't think she had the strength to make it back. The closest ranger station was quite a way off. We got back to the trail, and we started making our way back. I took out my radio to call it in. "I used to come here all the time," Anya said. "Never thought I'd get lost." "Yeah, well, it happens to the best of us." I smiled. "You made it. That's what counts." Anya sighed. "I thought I did it right." I stopped, listened, and looked. I followed the bells. All of it. She said, her hands shaking. "We don't do that anymore." I explained. "Yeah, I figured," she muttered. I told Anya that the Lady Bluebell program had been discontinued for over a decade. I found it strange she'd found any bells at all. I hadn't seen them in years, but there were more immediate concerns. For one, my radio was dead. I brought out my backup batteries, but the radio stayed silent. Still, Anya was in better shape than I thought, so I figured we'd make it back by nightfall. About 200 feet down the trail, something started to feel wrong. Looking around, I couldn't see any of the usual landmarks. We continued another 10 minutes, only to see the trail suddenly stop. Not slowly disappear into moss, just stop altogether. There were no trails like that here. Trails that just ended in a dead stop. And I wasn't taking any chances. I picked up my flare gun, aimed it up, asked Anya to stand back, and fired. The light soared into the sky with a whoosh, bathing the treetops with an intense red glow. "All right, now we sit tight," I said. "They can't find us if we keep moving." Anya made herself comfortable on a log and took a swig from my canteen. "Lady Bluebell takes you home," she sighed. She shook her head and handed back my canteen. A twinkle in her eye came and went. "Not anymore, it seems." We stayed out there for hours. We shared a protein bar, and Anya helped me set up a campfire. To my surprise, there was a stream nearby. There wasn't supposed to be, but there was. We boiled some water, refilled my canteen, and made ourselves comfortable. It could be hours before help arrived. It didn't take long for the sky to turn black. I figured no one would find us in the dark, so we set up camp. Anya had her tent, and I had a hammock. And we both went to bed early. But I couldn't get any sleep. It didn't make sense. You know, I'd walked that trail 1,000 times. My eyes drifted in the dark. I noticed a strip of blue tape wrapped around a nearby tree. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it wasn't there until I started to look for it. Anya was awake long before I was. She heated up a pack of chickpeas from my pack and sliced up some salami. I went to refill the water canteen, but I couldn't find my way back to the stream, realizing it just wasn't there anymore. It made my blood run cold. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, and suddenly it felt like I'd found an extra finger. None of this made any sense. I checked my map and double-checked my compass. There was nothing even close to a landmark in our vicinity. Anya was staring at me from across the campfire, and she gave me a reassured smile. "I saw her once, she said, back when I was a junior." "Yeah. Well, it's not uncommon," I said. "Lots of kids think they see her. We all make her up in our minds, trying to convince one another that she's real." No, I mean really saw her. Dress and all. Tall as hell. I wasn't even lost. She just stood there. Looking at me, she said. "Yeah, well, shadows can play tricks on us," I said. And I will admit I was getting a little nervous. No, see, that's the thing. Anya laughed. It was the middle of the day. We waited all day long, but no flares wore up, and we decided that the next morning we would hike out. Heading straight north should bring us to one of the main trails. I couldn't bring myself to tell Anya that I too had seen Lady Bluebell, and that night I stayed up listening to the wind. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't, and the more I tried to avoid it, the more I heard distant bells. The next day, we packed up and got moving. Anya was much better off than when I first met her, but we'd used up most of my rations. Still had some left, but we'd have to start foraging soon. Still, the trail shouldn't be more than a few hours out. We hiked through a clearing, stepping over collapsed trees and tall grass. When I saw something in the distance, I waved Anya over, and we took a detour. It was one of our old stop, listen, and look signs. I hadn't seen one in years, but someone had added "don't" to every line with bright blue paint. Don't stop. Don't listen. Don't look. Lady Bluebell won't take you home. We came to the same conclusion. We weren't alone out here. We continued north, but I couldn't help feeling that there was something off about this whole area. There were broken branches all over the trail. There was a spot next to a large rock that looked like someone had been sleeping there. I even found a few footprints, but Anya swore she'd never been there before. By late afternoon, I was getting worried. Not only had there been more tracks, but they were getting fresher. I started to take a closer look at the footprints so I could tell them apart. I needed to figure out how many others were out here. I was following the tracks of at least 3 people. When I saw another clearing ahead of us, it took me a minute to realize that we were walking in circles. I could even see the stop, listen, and look at the sign in the distance. I brought out my compass, took Anya by the arm, and kept going. We had to try again. I don't know when or where we got turned around, but we couldn't stop now, and we kept going north. And this time, I did not put away my compass for 1 second. At one point, we stopped to drink some water, and I looked back for a second, and I saw something in the distance. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was running. It took me several seconds to realize that it was human. A young man, rough hair, with cuts all over his legs and arms. He was only wearing a pair of torn jeans, and he didn't run like people usually do. He was hunched over and flailing his arms. He kept doing this strange motion with his neck like a bobblehead, never standing still. As he got closer, I could hear this constant mumbling. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I only understood that it was repeating. And then I noticed the sharpened rock in his hand. Before I realized what was about to happen, he charged us. He went for Anya first, but she was too quick for him. I grabbed my camping shovel from the side of my backpack, and I took this wild swing. I clocked him right across the side of his face. Severing a part of his ear, he reeled back and fell over. He struggled to regain his balance, but the hit made his eyes spin. His mouth kept opening and closing like a fish out of water, forming the same words over and over again. Don't stop. Don't listen. He looked straight at me, and a tear ran down his eye. Don't look. His voice shook. Don't look. His eyes flicked to something off to my side, a piece of blue tape hanging from a broken tree. He jumped up and fled in a bent-over gallop, bracing himself against trees and stumps. Anya just stood there, frozen, and I tried to put my hand on her shoulder, but she slapped it away. Just give me a second, she said. Please. After that, we slowed down, and I kept hearing noises in the distance, mumbled words and snapping twigs, and sometimes, when there was a sudden gust of wind, there'd be bells, sometimes one, sometimes several. But we just kept moving north. As night fell, I realized I didn't want to stop. Whenever we stopped, the sounds would get louder, and the bells would get closer. Anya wasn't doing much better. She sat next to our campfire for hours, slowly rocking back and forth. Sometimes I'd see her snapping her head in one direction or the other, as if reacting to something that only she could hear. I couldn't sleep for hours. I stared up at the night sky, waiting for the moon to show. But it never did. When I finally got up, it was still dark. I checked my watch, but it had stopped just before midnight. Anya was still up, staring into the dying campfire. It's been more than a couple weeks, said Anya. Time stopped making sense a long time ago. What was the last date you remember? I asked her. Late July, I think she said. And then something whispered in the back of my mind. What year? Anya, and I locked eyes and I repeated the question. What year, Anya? She didn't respond, and a chill crawled up my spine. And I thought, I don't know who the hell is sitting across from me, or what she's really seeing. We should pack up, she said, breaking the tension. It's still dark, I pointed out. Sometimes it stays that way for a while. Anya said, staring into the trees. Okay, Anya, you're not making any sense, I said. Sometimes it stays dark. She breaks the rules to keep us here. I've been here so long that I don't know what's real anymore. I thought I was. I thought I could trick myself into forgetting, but she won't let me. She's there. She's always there. I didn't say anything. Anya kept pacing back and forth, scratching the back of her head. I wrote that damn sign, she said. Because when you stop, she's there. When you listen, you hear her. And when you look. Anya grabbed my shoulder and turned me around. When you look, there she is. And I saw her then. In the distance, I saw her. A bone-thin woman, a few tufts of hair clinging to her scalp, a broken jaw hanging like a loose thread, swaying in the breeze. I could smell something sour coating my tongue. And of course, her signature blue dress. Lady Bluebell. I looked back, only to see Anya backing away, her pack full. She'd taken my canteen, and there was this wild fear in her eyes. I can't let her take me, Anya said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And before I could process what she'd done, a sound cut through the forest. Bells. There were so many bells. I turned to see the broken woman towering over me. My legs buckled as I looked up at this 9-foot-tall monster. Her torn blue dress was lined with bells that chimed as she moved closer, and I knew then that she wasn't going to let me leave. I stepped back, and she stepped forward. Her feet barely touched the ground, floating inches above the moss. She wasn't here to help me get home, and I turned and ran. I snagged my foot on fallen rocks. I fell down a sudden slope, dropping half my gear. I bloodied my hands and face, but I kept going. And somewhere along the way, the sun rose, stopping for air. I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. But the moment I stopped to listen, I heard one. I had to keep going. I don't know how long I was out there, at least a couple of days. I kept moving, stopping only for short rests. Sometimes I'd dream of bells, and I'd wake up hearing them. The slightest thought of Lady Bluebell drew her to me like a moth to an open flame. I'd hear the bells long before I saw her, and she was always there, just one stray thought away. I survived. By eating boiled pine cones, roots, and eggs from warbler nests. I tried to track my progress, but there was no way to navigate. I'd either end up where I came from or go in the wrong direction. I saw that same sign in that same clearing at least a dozen times. Don't stop. Don't listen. Don't look. My feet were torn up, and I'd grown a solid stubble. I was barely sleeping, and I was having trouble keeping my thoughts straight. I remember sitting by a stream, not knowing how I got there. Maybe the same stream I'd seen when I first saw Anya. I was wringing out my socks and trying my best to ignore my shivering hands. I felt so tired. Just getting back on my feet felt so impossible that I couldn't force myself to do it. So I just sat there with one naked foot in the ice-cold water. My skin turned from a painful purple to a sickly blue, and it took me a moment to realize that I wasn't alone. But it wasn't Lady Bluebell. It was Anya, just across the stream. She looked at me with pity. She looked almost apologetic, and it took me a few seconds to notice the makeshift spear in her hand. No doubt she used the Swiss Army knife she stole from my pack. I really am sorry, she said. After she feeds, she calms down. When she's calm, you can get out. I had to bring someone new in. I listened to her, and I almost didn't even care. I couldn't bring myself to curse or scream. I just hated Anya and what she'd turned me into. I kept my eyes on the stream, watching the water turn my foot a new shade of blue. Just take a nap, she said. Lean back and just let it happen. No fuss, no drama. I barely listened. All I could think of was that tinge of blue spreading across my foot. It made me think of bells. It made me look for her. That's it, said Anya, readying her spear. Keep still. I looked down at my hands, covered in scabs and bruises, and suddenly a pain shot through my left leg, a quick jab from her spear, and my body exploded with intense pain. It was like a burst of electricity shot through me as my blood mixed with the stream. I could feel my heart beating out of my chest. I crawled backwards, unable to put any weight on my leg. Anya backed away, staying just close enough to make sure Lady Bluebell was fed. But the lady was already there. I think my thoughts had called her, and this time I couldn't run. I heard the bells ringing closer, and I saw a long shadow cover the ground. I looked back for a moment, catching a glimpse of her dead eyes coming from me. Lady Bluebell didn't take you home anymore. I couldn't run, but I had to try something, anything. So I shut my eyes as tight as I could, and I pushed my fingers into my ears and I screamed. I figured that if I couldn't listen or look, maybe she'd be less interested in feeding on me. I focused on the pain in my leg, letting it take over my thoughts. My pulse went haywire, pushing me to panic and to run. But I didn't. There was a soft touch of cloth against my head, little metal. Bells dragged across my body as Lady Bluebell passed by me. She didn't want someone who couldn't look or listen, but Anya did. Keeping my eyes shut, I kept screaming until my throat felt raw. I felt a thump as something dropped to the ground, and I could feel the ground tremble with quick footsteps. Someone was running, and then a sudden stop. For what felt like an eternity, it was just me and my thoughts. Maybe she got away. Maybe we both made it. And then something needy bumped into me. Something warm and wet. It spattered onto my clothes and stained my face, drowning the air with a stench of blood. There was a feeling in the air, like a vibration or a scream. But I didn't turn to look and I didn't listen. Hours later, I made myself a crutch from a small branch. I pressed wet moss into my ears, and I kept my eyes shut, blind and deaf. I forced myself forward. It was just inches at a time, and every step shot lightning through me. And somewhere along the way, I felt a solid trail under my feet, and I opened my eyes and I noticed familiar landmarks. My watch started ticking, and my radio came to life. I was back on familiar ground. Anya had been right. You could get away after feeding. Later, I found out that I'd been gone 6 weeks. It was none other than Ranger Dan that had found me as he led a troop of junior rangers around the same trail as all those years ago. Now that some time has passed and my leg is healed, I've been assigned to an administrative position, and I stay away from the woods as much as I can. I haven't told anyone about what really happened, not only because it sounds completely insane, but because knowing about it might actually put them in danger. I might not get along with everyone, but I would not wish Lady Bluebell on my worst enemy. Anya Baker was indeed reported missing from a company retreat about 8 years ago. The crazed young man was a mystery. No one matching his description had been reported missing for years. When I was young, Lady Bluebell was the spirit of the woods. We stopped along the trails to listen and look, hoping some part of her was still out there. Maybe the world changes when we look at it, and sometimes it changes when we don't. I believe that she was some collective consciousness of belief, remaining in a forgotten part of what the park used to be. A creature we all made and abandoned. Like the ghost of someone who never truly was unheard, unseen, and unstoppable. Here. There was desperation and panic in the manager's voice as she blurted this out with a heavy breath. This matched the cashier's face, which changed from neutral and tired to dreadful and painfully awake. Another employee who was waiting behind the counter quickly got up and walked to somewhere in the back of the store. For context, it was a little past 9:30 at night. It had been a busy day for me. I had a test and multiple quizzes in my various classes, and I'd just gotten done with a hard gym session before returning to my apartment to find that I was fresh out of milk. I decided to run down to the convenience store located right under my apartment building. I knew they closed at 10, so I had plenty of time to pick up milk and browse their snacks. After finding nothing else of interest, I took the jug of milk to the counter to check out. Me being the only customer in the store at this point, the only other being 3 employees. Who were they? Maybe some sort of cleaning or maintenance crew for the store, but it wasn't closed yet. I picked up the milk jug and walked to the door. The manager stepped right in front of me. "We can't let you leave right now," she said. "It's not safe. You're just going to have to wait with us for them to pass through." "Who are they?" I asked. Why the hell was she blocking me from leaving? I would have imagined the store employees would want me to get out of the store now that closing time was coming up. The manager thought about my question for a moment before shaking her head and sighing like she was too stressed to give me an explanation at the moment. She turned around to pull down the metal blinds along the storefront, ignoring my question. As I said, they weren't supposed to close quite yet. It wasn't time. I decided I wasn't sticking around for whatever game they were playing. I walked to the door, but I stopped myself before going outside. On the other side of the door was a man dressed in an old yet expensive and fancy-looking suit with a big top hat. It looked as if a stock trader from the 1920s was ripped through space and time and placed on the other side of the glass. Only seconds passed before I heard a disembodied scream come from behind me. I looked back to the cashier with her hands over her mouth, looking at me with tears rolling down her face. The manager returned to the front of the store. When she saw me standing in front of the door and the man on the other side, she directed a loud and firm command at me. "Get away from the door now." "I did it," she said, walking back to her. But before I could ask or say anything, she squawked another command. "Go hide behind an aisle. Wait for me to tell you to come out. If you don't do as I tell you, you're going to die tonight. Now go." I had a mix of emotions and thoughts, but something told me that listening to her was my best bet. Still, I hadn't thought of a reason right then as to why my or anyone else's lives would be in danger. Maybe this man was a frequent problem for the store and harassed employees or what have you anyway. I did as I was told. I set the milk on the checkout counter, and I went to hide between some aisles in the corner of the store. I just stood there for a moment, feeling awkward and a little afraid of whatever was going on. I took out my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. I could have sworn it wasn't dead when I left my apartment. Unfortunate. I guess I just had to sit it out for now. I heard the manager talking to the cashier, who seemed quite afraid of the man or whatever was going on. About 2 minutes later, I heard the automatic doors open, and someone walked in. The echoing footsteps broke the silence as they approached the counter. They stopped, and silence filled the store once again, but only for a few seconds. A man with a friendly tone broke the silence. "Good evening." "Hello," the cashier responded. "Would you be so kind as to point me in the direction of where your store meets?" I tiptoed to the edge of the aisle and looked towards the counter. The man I saw outside was now standing in front of the cashier. He stood with perfect posture. He was much taller than I expected. He must have been around 6'5" or 6'6", and his stature towered even higher over the short cashier with his tall top hat. The cashier replied to him very timidly. "We have some packages of lunch meat, turkey ham. They're in that section right over there, you see." "Oh, I'm sorry, dear," the man in the suit interrupted. "I do not believe we are talking about the same thing. I was told there would be a fair stock of freshly harvested meats available for purchase. I don't know what you mean, sir." "Oh, I think you do." The man didn't move. He stayed standing in front of the counter, staring the silent cashier down. She looked down in despair. I could hear her breathing and whimpering as the man remained. It was as if he were programmed like an NPC character in a game, waiting for input before he could deliver another line of dialogue or make any move. I saw the manager walk up from behind. She must have been waiting in the back of the store, standing behind the man, albeit a good distance away. She addressed him herself. "How can we help you, sir?" she said rather calmly. The man slowly turned around. He was, to put it bluntly, extraordinarily handsome and well-kept, clean-shaven, with no bags under his eyes, no blemishes or imperfections in his skin, and pearly white teeth that glared from across the room as his eyes met the manager. "Oh, good evening. I was told there would be a fair stock of freshly harvested meat available for purchase," he repeated to the manager, while still sporting his gentle smile. The manager took a deep breath before she looked back up, making eye contact and saying, "Sir, unfortunately, we have run out of fresh meat. If you come back again, we will have a fresh shipment available for purchase, but we do not have any at the moment. Thank you for shopping with us." The man's smile faded as he stared down at the manager for what must have been a good half-minute. The complete absence of even the slightest movement made him look more like a statue than a person. He seemingly broke whatever trance he was in, and his smile returned. "I understand. I understand. I will return. I wish you ladies a wonderful night." And with that, he calmly walked out the automatic doors, leaving the store. The cashier behind the counter broke down in tears. The manager walked behind the counter, put an arm around her, and escorted her to the back of the store. I followed. The manager got to the opposite back corner of the store I'd been hiding and opened some sort of janitor closet. Inside was the third employee whom I saw retreat earlier. He was on a phone, not a cell phone, some sort of wireless home phone that I assumed to be the phone for the store. "Were you able to get in touch with them?" she asked. "They're still trying to figure out how to get here," he said. "It might take them a while. Can you hold it down by yourself out there?" The manager nodded her head as she let out another sigh, closing the door and turning around to me. "We might be here for a while," she said. "I need one of my employees on the phone so we can get help. And the other seems to be incapable of helping. So I need you to do as I say so we can all survive this. You don't have a choice. If you try to leave or if you mess up, if you don't do exactly as I say, we're all going to die. Do you understand?" Yeah, I understand," I replied. Though I was far from assured of my ability, and even more so that any of this was real, I still had no clue what was going on and who they were, either regarding the old man in the suit or whomever the employee in the closet was on the phone with. The manager walked behind the counter next to the first register. I thought about running, about booking it out of the door, getting back to my apartment where I wouldn't have to deal with this circus of a prank they were running, but I didn't have time to make a plan to run. The automatic doors opened again, and I heard quieter, yet frantic footsteps enter. I looked at the manager, and she waved her hand and silently mouthed what I assumed to be hidden. Before ducking under the counter herself, I shuffled back to my original spot behind the aisles. There was the sickly sound of heavy breathing, like that of an old asthmatic man. They ran from the entrance to the counter. They stopped for a moment, but the breathing was incessant. It began running again. It seemed to get close, then far, then closer, then far and closer again. I quickly put the pieces together, realizing it was moving up and down the aisles, sweeping all of them in order, and it would eventually run down mine. I panicked for a few seconds, trying to piece together an idea of how not to be spotted. I hoped that whoever it was wasn't perceptive enough to notice me move over an aisle. When it got to the aisle before mine, I waited for it to walk a distance down, away from me. I turned around the edge of my aisle, and I took a peek around the corner. I finally saw it. It wasn't a person. It stood about 4 or 5 feet above the ground. It was completely naked and had pale white skin, too white to be any living human. Its back was massively hunched, its spine protruding so far it looked as if it would tear through the flesh any moment. The legs were thin and small. They didn't look like they could support the weight of the creature they carried. The feet and toes were like that of a lizard. When it turned the corner, I could see its short arms with human-like hands. They were far too large, with dirty long black nails. Its chest was defined by tight skin over a large rib cage, and the rest of its torso looked tightly wrapped to its skeleton, as if it was starving to death. The face was the worst. Its jaw was much longer than that of any person, and it came to a point on the bottom, looking almost cartoonish. Its mouth was left open, leaving the teeth and gums exposed. The teeth looked pristine, like they were made perfectly and couldn't have any blemishes. But they were very long, too long. The gums were black. They seemed to be rotting away. The nose and eyes were like that of a man, but the whites were some sort of shade of green, like it had an illness. It had only a few strands of wiry white hair. I moved as quietly as I could to the next aisle. When the creature had finally finished searching the whole store, it made its way out of the aisles and through the automatic doors, incessantly breathing all the way like it was about to drop dead any minute. Only seconds later, the doors opened again. The manager yelled for me to come to the front. I got out from behind my aisle and walked up cautiously, eyeing the door to see who was about to come through, but it just seemed to stay open. "Get behind the counter," she said. "Do not say anything. Smile when they smile." Smile when who? She interrupted. A child ran through the door. A child, I thought, out in the city at this hour. Why? Where were its parents? 6 more followed. They all seemed very young. Around 5 or 6 would be my guess. They started running all over the store, between the aisles and around the front. I think they were playing some sort of game like tag or hide and seek, laughing and acting as you would expect kids this age to act. "Just let them be and do as I said," the manager began. "When they smile, you smile back." They kept on playing for 5 minutes or so before they collectively stopped running around and came to the front. They quickly formed a single file line in front of the counter before each one grabbed a bar of chocolate. The first kid walked up to the register and pulled out $1 and some change. It happened to be the exact price of the bar, though in this situation I don't think anyone would have protested if it weren't. After the first kid placed his change on the counter, he turned and looked at me. He just maintained eye contact while not displaying any particular emotion, very much like how normal children stare at strangers in public for no real reason. But I found out soon enough that these weren't normal children. The kid smiled at me, and I did as I was instructed. I smiled back. Unfortunately, I couldn't bear to maintain my smile. When the kid's smile grew, revealing that his mouth opened from one end of his head to another, practically touching ear to ear, he revealed a long row of jagged teeth. He must have noticed a change in mood from my facial expression, and luckily for me, so did the manager. She turned her head slightly in my direction. "Smile back," she said quietly, yet very firmly. I forced myself to smile, staring at this monster, not a child that had locked its gaze with mine. It giggled, breaking focus from me before grabbing the candy bar and running out of the store. I endured the same treatment. For the next 5, all of them did the exact same thing. It felt as though I were an assembly line worker whose function was simply to be exposed to the unnatural image of those monsters while I tried my hardest to hold a smile. Luckily, it wasn't long, and I was relieved when it was over. I turned and started to walk away from the counter before the manager grasped my arm and yanked me back. "There's still one here," she began. "We don't move until it leaves." I nodded my head and said nothing. I could hear it running around in the back aisles of the store. I guess this one was the troublemaker of the group. "I'm gonna find you," it said as it ran. A few minutes passed before it stopped, right in front of the janitor's closet. It looked up at it like it knew something before gripping the handle and pulling it down. The cashier was holding the door and tried to resist it from opening, but it was nowhere near strong enough. The child monster let out a scream before yanking the door with incredible force, breaking it off its hinges and sending the cashier across the floor. It looked back and forth from the cashier to the other employee on the phone, and then in a playful voice it said, "I'm going to tell you," before it proceeded to run out of the store, giggling the entire time, not bothering to buy a candy bar like the others. The cashier seemed to be knocked unconscious. The other employee peeked out of the closet. With the door now gone, he looked up at the manager. "What do we do now? We have no idea which one the kid is going to wake up. It could be one of the thousands. Our friends haven't found their way here yet either. I think we need to make a run for it." "No," she interrupted. "You and I both know that won't play out well for us. We need to stay here until it passes or until the team gets here. Take the phone and go hide behind the house. We need to keep in touch if we don't." "Oh shit, hide." The manager ducked under the counter. Me and the employee with the phone ran to the back corner of the store. As the automatic doors opened once again, I looked back to see we'd forgotten something. The cashier was still on the floor, knocked out and unresponsive. I tried to get to her, but I was caught by the employee next to me. With the phone still in one hand, shaking his head, he whispered to me, "Don't man, it's too late." My heart sank in my chest, but I believed him. I sat down with weak legs. Again, the store was quiet. quiet enough for us to hear the hooves clanking against the hard floor as they entered. Sadistic laughter joined them. This one sounded like an adult voice, and likely a man. The steps were loud enough that it was obvious whatever was walking had some weight to it. It was walking next to the aisles opposite of us, where the cashier was still laying. We moved to the edge of our aisle, but stayed long enough to see it. Coming into view from behind the aisle opposite of us were the legs of a deer supporting the upper body of a man. Or at least it looked to be the case. I couldn't be sure because it was clothed in a red and blue clown outfit. The jester style hat matched the colors. It stood around 6 feet or so, but the body underneath stretched the arms and shoulders of the outfit from its massive build. The hands were black, and each finger had a jagged, long, sharp nail. The face was pale but shiny, as if it had been painted. The lips and around the eyes were painted as well, though they were black. The nose was a round red ball. It stopped walking and laughing when it got to that aisle, right in front of the broken door, and the unconscious cashier that lay in front of it. The clown thing bent down and effortlessly picked up the cashier by her neck and held her up in front of him. It stared at her, tilting its head in curiosity, as if it had found some type of rare specimen. The employee next to me was whispering a rushed description through the phone. I could hear a voice on the other end. Though it was much too quiet to make out any words, the cashier opened her eyes, finally waking up before her eyes grew even wider. As she realized what she was looking at, she screamed at the clown thing, holding her up by the neck. It seemed to be repulsed by the scream and pulled her in, clenching its jaw around her neck and taking a bite. Her mouth hung open as she was instantly silenced. The clown took another bite before reaching its other hand up to grab her head as well. In a swift motion, it ripped her head from her body and tossed it in our direction, spreading blood around the back aisle like a sprinkler. The head landed only feet from us. I didn't dare to take another look, but it didn't matter anyways. Another round of hysterical laughter broke out from the clown thing. "I know you're over there, but I made it." "I'm sure you're a trick," it asked. The employee next to me dropped the phone and tried to make a run for it. He made it to the open space in front of the counter before the clown thing ran in front of him. The employee's full-speed sprint was easily broken, and he tumbled back. The clown wasn't fazed by being run into one bit. It picked the employee up and lifted him to its level, and it violently pulled on both arms and ripped them from their sockets. The employee, still left alive, let out his own blood-curdling screams. As he bled out helplessly on the floor, the clown thing laughed for a moment and then crushed his skull. I looked down at the phone, hearing some sort of feedback from whoever was on the other end. I picked it up and held it to my ear. "Hello," I whispered. "Listen, you need to blind it. Check our phones. I know it wouldn't work before, but it'll work now. You need to turn the flashlight on and point it in its eyes. Are you hearing me?" I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. It was on, and more than that, it was somehow fully charged. I hadn't charged it, and then I heard the clown speak from the middle of the store. "Now, doctor, thinking that I forgot about you, I've got a different trick for you. I know you'll like it." I dropped the store phone, and like the employee, I tried to run. I dashed down the last aisle before I realized I had no clue where the hell I planned on going. I panicked, reaching for my cell phone again. It fell from my pocket and onto the floor. I quickly recovered it, trying to turn the flashlight on as running hooves approached from behind me. As I was grabbed and forcefully turned over, I barely had the luck of turning on the phone's flashlight just in time. The clown screamed in pain and anger as it ran past me and into the other aisles. It ripped and threw everything off the shelves it possibly could, trashing the store and tearing it apart. I recovered, and I kept pointing my phone's flashlight in its direction. It tripped over a shelf and fell flat on its face. Jumping back to its feet, the clown turned around and swatted at me, but covered its eyes and resumed screaming. When the light met its eyes once again, it ran, tripping and screaming through the doors of the store, and it left. It was silent inside once again. The manager, who'd been taking cover behind the counter this whole time, stood up and got a look at the carnage herself. I could tell by her face that something inside her had died when she saw the dismembered bodies of her coworkers, but she said nothing about it. Instead, she turned to me and said, "Where is the phone?" I turned off my cell phone flashlight and put it back into my pocket. Before walking over the mess of merchandise and blood to the back of the store, I picked up the store phone and walked it to the front, handing it to the manager who hadn't moved, still staring in disbelief at the bodies in front of her. She took it and began conversing with someone on the other end. I stayed where I was, not having the guts to look behind me and see everything again. After about 30 seconds of a conversation from which I could understand nothing, and one I wasn't paying much attention to in the first place, the manager let out another sigh, this one of relief, and muttered, "Oh, thank God. How long?" There was more talking from the other end. Okay, I can do that. There's still one alive. I'll have them watch out for your arrival," the manager said. With that, she set the phone down and looked at me with drained and tired eyes. "I need you to stand by the door and watch for black SUVs to pull up. Let me know when they get here. Yell to me, and I'll tell you if they're the team we're expecting. If they're not, then hide. I need to do something in the back." She picked back up the phone and headed to the back of the store. I didn't feel like asking any more questions. I figured that whoever this team was, they must be our way out of this nightmare. I walked over and stood in front of the automatic doors, looking outside. I couldn't see anything but the typical ST. I knew, but with no one on it. All the time I waited, I could hear the manager tinkering with something in the back. It was here that I began to process everything I'd just been through. It was too much. My thoughts and emotions ran wild in my head, but above all, I wanted to know what this was. For the next few minutes, I weighed the possibilities in my head and contemplated the merit of each of them, of any of them. None of them gave a clear explanation, and I still don't have one eventually. The black SUVs pulled up, and a mix of men in tactical gear with rifles and others in formal suits poured out. There were 4 or 5 cars and around 6 people empty from each. I turned to the back of the store and yelled, "Hey, is this them? They're here, I think." No response. "Hey," I yelled again as I walked to the back of the store. At the end of the backmost aisle, the phone lay on the ground. I walked up to it in confusion and kneeled to pick it up, but I was close enough to make out the yells on the other end before I did. "We're here. Do you copy? Hello. Our team is entering now. Are you still with us? Hello." Before I could pick up the phone, I stood back up and walked around a corner. Into the last aisle, the manager was on the ground, laying face up and in a pool of her own blood. Her body was cut open at the belly, and on top of her crouched a man. It was the man from earlier, the first one who walked in, the tall man with a fancy old suit and hat, but this time, he was without the hat and coat for his suit. He held a large knife, which he was carving into the manager's body. Organs surrounded the two. He must have cut them out. He looked up from what he was doing, and he smiled at me before looking back down and continuing. In a matter-of-fact voice, he spoke to me. I did say I would be back for the meat. I don't have any problem harvesting it myself. With that, he pulled their heart out and held it up like it was a piece of art he was proud of. Before putting it in a suitcase on the floor next to him and closing it, he stood up, looked at May, and then at his knife. "I'm sure that you'll give me fine cuts too." And then he smiled at me. I turned back around the corner and I ran for the door, and he stopped in his tracks when he saw the men approaching from outside. "Oh, well, aren't you the lucky one tonight?" He returned his knife to a sheath in his vest. Before calmly turning around and heading back into the last aisle, he came back with his suitcase in hand and the manager's body over his shoulder, carrying her like she was weightless. He approached the janitor's closet and opened the door. I swore it was ripped off its hinges not minutes earlier. When he opened it, cold air poured out and in the small angle available to me, I saw a body hanging from a meat hook. The man walked in, throwing the manager's body somewhere inside before turning around and grabbing the door handle. He looked at me one last time before closing it, and in a friendly tone, he spoke one last time. "Good day." The automatic doors opened behind me, and the swarm of men rushed in. Immediately, half a dozen or so walked to the closet door and pointed their weapons at it. When it opened, they were met with the inside of a closet and nothing more. "Shit," I heard one say before kicking something off the shelf. "We've been after that son of a bitch for months. How does he get away every time?" The rest swept around the remainder of the store. Some brought in weird-looking equipment. Too much was happening for me to account for all of it, but I did take some note of what they were doing. Some collected hairs that had fallen on the floor. Others used a black light to show footprints. They collected all the change in $1 bits that the children had paid with eventually. 2 large boxes were brought in that they used to collect the bodies of the other workers. I was left unaccounted for, it seemed. A few minutes passed before one man in a suit approached me. He didn't have any interest in asking me anything. It was clear he wanted to make a statement. Well, I know this is a lot to take in, and I know that not much of it makes any sense. There's no way we can explain it to you that it will. I'm sorry for whatever you had to see or experience tonight, but there's nothing we can do about it. These things are doing this to people all over the world, the reasons we have yet to discover. This is the 7th time this store, in particular, has been targeted. We are doing what we can. We are one of the only ones out there trying to stop them. We need you to stay silent about this. If people know about us, if they find out, we'll be shut down and none of this will ever be fixed. People will die, and it'll only get worse. If you want to save anyone else, keep your mouth shut. He looked at me in pity for a moment, and then he pointed towards the entrance. You can walk out those doors whenever you're ready. I don't know what he meant, but I never planned on keeping it silent. What happened to those convenience store workers needs to be told. People need to be aware of this, though I didn't let my intentions be known there. I said nothing and walked through the automatic doors and outside, in front of the street packed with their vehicles. I looked back at the store. The lights were on, and it was empty. I turned back to the street. The SUVs were all gone. People were back, walking about like they would on any other night. I heard the metro train approaching again. It was over. Working at Ophelia's wasn't all that bad behind the gimmick. It was more or less like any other restaurant I'd worked in. I'd heard a lot of people call it the Goth Hooters, although I really think that's the best comparison. They paid us well, and they treated us well, so there really wasn't much else I could realistically ask for. Honestly, if it wasn't for the VIP bar and their weird set of rules, I'd have said there was nothing even remotely special about Ophelia's. But there's the rub, right? The VIP bar and the rules surrounding it. On my first day working there, the owner himself sat me down to go over the rules, and they made it pretty clear that they took these rules very seriously. Yeah, they're mostly there for both guidance and as, precaution, he said. Corporate really pushes us to make sure they're in force. So try to keep them in mind when you're on shift. And I know some of them might seem a little absurd, but I promise you, they're there for a reason. I told him that I understood and assured him I'd do everything I could to follow the rules, and I meant that. Even if I wasn't entirely sure why they needed to exist in the first place. So were the rules for working in Ophelia's. I'll tell you, Lord knows I have read them over so many times that I know them by heart. They were posted in the kitchen, behind a bar, and by the employee lockers, so it was hard to go anywhere without being reminded of them. Rule number 1. If a guest presents a black card, it must be taken to the bar and scanned. If the card is approved by our system, lead them to the VIP bar, which can be accessed through an unmarked door in the back of the restaurant. Number 2. If the card is not approved, notify the management immediately, but do not notify the guest and do not engage in conversation with the guest. No new guest may be seated until the unapproved guest has been dealt with. Please see lockdown and evacuation procedures for instructions in the event of an escalation. Number 3. Please review the lockdown and evacuation procedures regularly. The safety of our staff and guests is our top priority. Be familiar with emergency exits and safe zones. Number 4. Only employees with a violent lanyard ID badge are to be allowed access to the VIP bar. Wait staff are not to follow the guest into the VIP bar, even if invited. If a guest invites a staff member into the VIP bar, they are to refuse and report the incident to management. Neither the VIP bar nor the policies surrounding the VIP bar are to be discussed with outside parties. Violation of this rule will result in instant termination. Number 7. While on shift, you will be given a name to use. The name you are given must be used at all times while inside the restaurant. Do not tell the customers your real name under any circumstances. Number 8, for your safety, do not make direct eye contact with the guest, especially if they have presented you with a black card. Number 9, if any guest requests to meet up with you outside of work or asks for your real name, you are to say no. If the guest persists, call management. Number 10, if you suspect a guest has followed you outside of work, inform the management ASAP. They will decide whether the police need to be contacted or if the problem should be dealt with by another AVE. Do not contact the police yourself. So like I said, the rules were weird. No eye contact, using fake names, being encouraged to report incidents to the management instead of calling the police. I'll seem a little suspicious, you know. Then there's the whole set of rules regarding the VIP bar. They weren't joking about taking them seriously either. I'd seen the waitress, Persephone, tear some girls a new one for flirting with customers or using their real names in the restaurant. I had even seen her fire people on the spot. This one girl was let go when she posted a picture of the rules online, and one of the bartenders who'd started around the same time I had lost his job after trying to sneak into the VIP bar. Now, Persephone wasn't necessarily someone I describe as strict. If anything, she was pretty easygoing most of the time. But when it came to the rules, there was no room for debate with either her or the management. Speaking of the VIP bar, I didn't really know what went on down there, and neither did most of the employees. But we had our suspicions, mainly that there was something illegal going on down there. Although speculation on exactly what ranged from a Breaking Bad-style drug lab to human trafficking, tamer theories suggested that it just might be a shady meeting place for, weird characters or a harmless speakeasy that marketed itself by being exclusive. Either way, most of us had no idea what was down there, and the few of us who did, we never talked about it. Despite the secrecy, I personally figured that whatever was going on in the VIP bar wasn't anything too illegal. Every Ophelia's had one, and they couldn't all be drug labs, right? Plus, most of the handful of staff members that did have access to the VIP bar were bartenders. Simon, that at least implied that there was an actual bar down there. Either way, I never questioned any of it that much. The regular bar work paid pretty well, and the police had never showed up to investigate. So there was at least an implication that whatever was going on down there was fully above board. I was curious, don't get me wrong, about the VIP bar, but I didn't really think about it that much, and it rarely affected my day-to-day work. A few times a day, a customer would come in with a black card and I'd scan it. When it came back approved, they always did, I'd show them to the door. They'd scan their card and go downstairs. Usually they'd come back in like an hour or so, although if they were too drunk or too rowdy, the bouncer downstairs would turn them away. I'd never, actually seen the downstairs bouncer, but I was told we had one. Now, the black card customers never really stood out to me in any meaningful way. They just seemed like regular people going about their business. Sometimes they'd come in groups, sometimes they'd come alone, sometimes they'd eat before showing their card to go downstairs, and sometimes they'd eat after. There were some faces I learned to recognize as regular black card customers, and during the brief conversations I had with some of them as they got a drink at the bar, they not only seemed pretty nice, they seemed normal. They weren't shady. They never acted like they were hiding anything, or like what went down in the bar was some big secret. They seemed extremely normal, and I think that's a big part of why I didn't question what was going on down there. There truly didn't seem to be anything that off about it. The mystery didn't seem important or even like much of a mystery. Yeah, it was weird, but the entire freaking restaurant was weird. They paid well. Nothing seemed shady. I didn't question it, and everything was fine. And then Hector showed up. Now, Hector Volvo looked to be in his mid-50s. He had graying hair, tan, leathery skin, and a sort of weathered look to him. Although his physique was damn near godlike, I could see his arms under his t-shirt, and it was pretty clear that he hadn't missed a lot of days at the gym. Now he wasn't a regular. I'd never actually seen him there before, which is part of why I didn't pay that much attention to him at first when he came in. He sat at a booth in Kitty's section, and he snacked on some appetizers. Calamari from the look of it. Kitty came in to check on him every so often, although Hector mostly seemed content to get his calamari, check his phone. At one point I did notice him reach out to grab her arm, and I saw that she did pause to look at him. although didn't think much of it if she'd had a problem with him. She would have told me. I mean, maybe I'm not the toughest guy in the world, but not that small. And I've got a deeper voice at times, which makes it easy for me to come off as intimidating, even though I've never thrown a punch in my life. As a result, most of the girls usually came to me when they had a problem with a customer, and Kitty was no exception. Now, I wouldn't exactly call us friends, but we got along, and I always liked her. Kitty was in her mid-20s with long black hair that she usually wore loose. She was a good-looking woman, and I'd had to step in a few times before when some drunk customer had confused customer service with a smile for flirting and gotten upset when she politely declined their advances. Since Kitty hadn't said anything to me about Hector touching her arm, I was willing to completely forget it, until she came to me with a black card. "This is from the gentleman at 17, she said. I nodded, and I took the card from her before taking it to the computer at the far side of the bar. The black card had a picture of the owner as well as his name, Hector Volume 6, although no information aside from that. They didn't have any address. No date of birth. There wasn't any logo denoting who the card belonged to, just a red four-pointed star in the upper right-hand corner, not a cross. This was clearly intended to be something else. Now all black cards look like this, so I mean Hector's wasn't anything special. I swiped the card and I waited for the approved notification to pop up, as it always did. Instead, a new notification popped up. Declined. Please contact management. My brow furrowed, and I looked over toward Hector. He was staring at the bar, and I made a point not to make direct eye contact as I swiped the card a second time. Declined. Please contact management. I set the black card aside, and I reached into my pocket to text the boss. He wasn't on site at the moment, but I knew he could be in about 20 minutes. Kitty stood by the bar, waiting on me. Everything okay, Daniel?" she asked. "It's declined," I replied. Looking up at her, "Declined," she repeated. No, that can't be right. He said it's good." "Well, the system says otherwise," I said with a shrug. Her eyes settled on my phone, and for a moment I thought I saw something in her expression. Relief, maybe. I was about to ask her if she was okay, when I noticed that Hector had gotten up and was coming towards us. "Hey, everything is all right here?" he asked. Yeah, of course." I lied, putting on a fake smile for him. "Yeah, the VIP bar. It's just at full capacity right now. I'm checking with the host downstairs to see if we can fit you in." "At capacity?" Hector asked. He glanced at Kitty, but didn't say anything. "I'm sure you can make room for one more, can't you?" Yeah, of course, sir." "Yeah, we're just making sure we can. If you'd like to have a seat, I'll send you another drink at the house." Now, I figured that would be enough to get him to back off, but Hector didn't seem interested. "Oh, come on. Can't take this long to get an answer from a host, can it?" he asked. Sorry, sir. They're pretty busy down there," I said. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Kitty rounding the bar. That was odd. She didn't usually go back here with me. "Really? I'd never seen them that busy," Hector said. He leaned up against the bar, and he smiled at me, a smile that was unsettling. His teeth almost seemed like they were sharpened to a point, although even that description didn't quite suit him. That smile, it looked like something you'd see on a deep-sea fish. "Oh, come on, why don't you just send me down? I won't cause a fuss, I promise," he said. "I'm sorry, sir." My breath caught in my throat a little. I looked around, hoping that someone else on the wait staff would notice that something was wrong, but they were all busy. The supervisor on shift, Persephone, was on the other side of the restaurant, currently busy, and the management was out. I felt Kitty coming up beside me, and I looked over at her. Her expression was placid and calm, unsettlingly so. "You're sorry," Hector repeated, his tone almost mocking. "Come on, kiddo, at least look me in the eye when you talk to me." He leaned in closer, but I looked right past him, right up until I felt Kitty beside me. I looked over at her in the instant before she grabbed me, jerking my head to the side, trying to make me look directly at Hector. I was strong enough to fight her off, but not strong enough to fight off both of them. Kitty pushed me, and I stumbled for a moment. Hector reached over the bar to grab me, and for just a moment my eyes met his relaxation. He spoke that word, and I felt calm, drunk almost. Look at me. Kitty helped me regain my balance, and I finally looked Hector in the eye. I knew I wasn't supposed to. I knew I shouldn't. I didn't want to, but I did it anyway. My body just moved, obeying his command and locking eyes with him. I could feel something in my mind. Something moving, shifting, pushing me aside. Why don't we all go down to the VIP bar? Hector said, "Oh, and bring a corkscrew. We might need it." The answer I wanted to give was no. But those aren't the words that came out of my mouth. "Yes, sir." "Right this way, sir," I said, and I handed him back his black card. As I left the bar, I paused, both to grab a corkscrew and a violet lanyard from under the counter. The bar manager had left it there in case nobody else was available to open the door in the VIP bar. I'd had to use it a few times before, although I'd never gone past the door. Hector and Kitty both followed me as I left the bar, and from the corner of my eye I could see a fear in Kitty's eyes, and I realized that she was in the same state I was in, aware, thinking, but unable to do anything. I'd always thought that the rule about not looking customers in the eye, it's just part of the gimmick. It was dumb, but they paid me to follow it, so I followed it. Only now did I begin to understand why it existed. Although if this was why they'd implemented the rule, what was waiting for us downstairs? I approached the door to the VIP bar, and I scanned the card at the end of the lanyard before quietly opening the door. I looked over to Hector, holding the door open for him as an invitation. "Oh, you're too kind," he said. "Now let's go downstairs and see if we can't find ourselves a room downstairs." I thought we weren't supposed to go downstairs. We sure as hell weren't supposed to follow a customer down there. But Kitty and I both obeyed silently, following Hector down into the darkened stairwell, into the basement of Ophelia's. I could feel my heart racing as panic set in. I don't think I'd ever been so scared in my life. Here I was, completely out of my own control and being led into pure darkness. Beside me, I could hear Kitty's shallow, trembling breaths. If I was in full control of myself, I would have reached out to offer her a hand, but I wasn't in control. We reached the bottom of the stairs and found ourselves in a small white lobby with a bar, and some small tables with plush chairs. The bartender behind the bar at the time was busy with some other guests and didn't seem to notice us. Hector didn't even look at the bar. He just led us toward a long white hallway lined with black doors. At the end of the hall was another set of stairs, presumably leading to some other entrance. Although I'd never heard anything about a second entrance to the VIP bar before, beside the entrance to the hall, I noticed a large dark statue of a spider with a torso of a woman. If I wasn't under Hector's spell, I might have actually admired it. It was taller than I was, and both grotesque and beautiful at the same time. It was incredibly well designed. It almost looked lifelike, the short platinum blonde hair on her head. It looked real, and I could have sworn that her 8 shiny black eyes were watching me as I passed. Hector stared at the statue and smiled calmly. He looked around before walking down the hallway, glancing at the door as we passed. Each one had a small window in it, allowing us to see inside. Looking through those windows as we passed, I recognized a few people who I'd seen going down into the VIP bar earlier. Most of them were regulars, although the things they were doing there, each of them seemed to be sitting on a chair with someone else. Sometimes a man, sometimes a woman. In almost all cases, they were bleeding, usually from the arm or the shoulder, and I could have sworn that our regulars were drinking their blood. I only caught a quick glimpse of what was going on. I didn't see enough to know for sure, but it was hard to mistake those brief glimpses I got. As I passed by the rooms for anything else, what the hell was this place? Because this wasn't like any bar I'd ever seen before. Hector paused in front of an empty room and gestured for Kitty and I to go inside. She went in first, opening the door and staring at the black leather chaise before her. I could see panic in her eyes. She'd seen what I'd seen through the doors in the hall, and odds are she'd noticed Hector's nightmare teeth as well. I think she already knew what was coming. "You're in the corner," Hector said. "But you." He turned Kitty around to look her in the eyes. He looked at her with this uncomfortable hunger, and I could see her trembling in fear. Hector grinned and gripped the Rob Zombie shirt she'd been wearing, tearing it open with disturbing ease. Kitty didn't make a sound, but I could see tears in her eyes. "Get on it," Hector said, and Kitty turned to sit down on it. Hector approached her, pausing to sniff her hair as he sat down beside her. He tilted her head, admiring her unbroken skin for a moment. I could feel a rage bubbling up in me. I wanted to hurt this guy. Kitty was my friend, my colleague, and seeing her so afraid, knowing that he was going to do something so horrible to her, it made my blood boil, but I could only just stand there, wishing I could help her, wishing I could pull him off of her. Now, I had no illusions I could win a fight against this guy, but maybe I could just stop him. If I could just keep him busy while she called for help. "Oh, very fresh," Hector crooned. "I'm going to enjoy this." He opened his mouth, revealing his full set of teeth. I wanted to scream in the moment before he sank them into Kitty's shoulder. She whimpered in pain as blood trickled down from her wound, and Hector drank a greedy mouthful. After greedy mouthful, he let out a contented hum before swallowing another mouthful of blood, and that was when the door flew open. I was almost relieved to see Persephone storm into the room, looking angrier than I'd ever seen her. "That's enough," she snarled, and Hector looked up at her, a quiet fury in his eyes. That didn't quite match her own. He pushed Kitty aside before standing up. His teeth were bared, and I noticed Persephone's lips curling back, revealing an almost identical set of jagged fangs. "Whatever happened to privacy?" Hector asked. "Your membership was revoked. You don't belong here," Persephone snapped. "God, here we go. Isn't an old man entitled to a meal? Let me eat in peace. I'm not even taking your blood stock, and odds are, the girl will live. That's not the point, and you know it." Persephone hissed. "Oh, let me eat in peace," Hector said again, taking a step toward her. His eyes shifted over toward me. "We wouldn't want to make a mess of this situation, will we? That bartender of yours looks awfully upset. Be ashamed if he got hurt during this whole mess, wouldn't it?" Even though he didn't say it, I could sense what he wanted to do. I tried to fight my own body as it bent to his will, but I couldn't. I lifted the corkscrew in my hand up to my throat, and I stared at Persephone with wide, terrified eyes as I felt the sharp point touch my skin. Talk about pulling a cork. Hector chuckled. Persephone looked over at me, her eyes locked with mine, and I could feel something in my mind shifting, as if she was trying to influence me. Maybe the same way Hector did. Daniel put the corkscrew down, but my body didn't move. "You're a young kid," Hector began. "When you get to my age, the control you can exert over people, it's damn near absolute. But it takes time and it takes patience. Last chance. Back off. Leave me to my meal. And they both get to go home tonight, keep this between us, and I might even share with you next time. When's the last time you had a square meal, girlie?" I could see a quiet defeat in Persephone's eyes, and the gears in her head seemed to be turning. "Fine," she finally said. "You can dine here, but if you do, you abide by our rules. The staff is off limits. Those two are off limits. I can get you better blood. I can get you as much as you want, but I need an assurance. I need them both to go free." Hector seemed to think it over. "Is that so?" he asked. "Room for. There's a blood donor there. You can have her," Persephone said. "But the waitress and the bartender are off limits." Hector huffed before looking over at Kitty. "Go," he said, and she immediately ran to Persephone's side. Tears went down her cheeks as she pressed a hand to her wound. Persephone grabbed her, holding her tight as she glared over at Hector. "Daniel next," she said. "When we got to room 4, Hector replied. "Tell you what, wait outside the door for me." He looked over at me next. "Keep that corkscrew where it is and go outside with them." "I'll follow." Persephone quietly escorted Kitty through the door, and once they were through, my legs carried me out behind them. Hector watched us go before speaking to me again. "Hey, who's out there with you?" he asked. "No one," I replied. It was just myself, Persephone, and Kitty in the otherwise empty hall. "Where's the spider?" I looked down the hallway. The spider statue that had been in the lobby was gone. I opened my mouth to answer that I didn't know, although before the words left my mouth, I saw it. Only now it was on the ceiling, right above the door. Hector saw the look on my face. He followed my eyes, and though he couldn't see what was waiting for him, he still knew it was there. "Oh, you think you're clever, don't you? Daniel, kill yourself." My heart skipped a beat in my chest as I moved to drive the corkscrew into my throat, and then I felt something slamming into me. Kitty tackled me to the ground, grabbing me by the wrist to force the corkscrew away from my throat. Persephone grabbed me as well in one fluid motion. I saw the spider on the roof move. They darted into the room, and I saw Hector stare up at them with a quiet acceptance in the moment before their talons tore into his flesh. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, snatched off the ground and wrapped in silk. He didn't even scream, but I could feel whatever influence he had fading from my mind as I regained control. "Daniel, are you all right?" Persephone asked as I hurled the corks through her side. My hands were shaking. There was a small cut on my neck, but otherwise I was fine. I nodded. She took a look at the cut on my neck, before finally helping me up and going to attend to Kitty's wound. While she did that, I found myself staring up at the ceiling. Hector was fully encased in webbing now, and I watched as the spider on the ceiling secured their work. I wasn't sure if he was alive or dead, and honestly, I didn't really care. If he was still alive, well, odds are he wouldn't be for much longer. After Hector was gone, Kitty and I had a very, very long conversation with Persephone about exactly what the hell had just happened. A conversation that I admittedly still haven't fully processed. It feels a little dismissive to say. We talked it out and everything turned out just fine. But in a lot of ways, that is exactly what happened. Kitty and I were both paid a considerable bonus for our troubles, and she ended up quitting a couple weeks later. I don't blame her for that. We haven't stayed in touch, but I do think about her sometimes, and I hope she's doing okay. As for me, well, I got my own Violet lanyard. I already know what's down in the VIP bar, so might as well do some work down there, too. I'm not complaining. The tips down there are really good. You know, of all the things that people suggested that the VIP bar might be, I never would have considered the possibility that it was a bar where vampires and other fae who drink blood could feed off of willing prey, although in hindsight that does explain a lot. Once you realize that the rules exist to protect the staff from any bad actors who might visit the restaurant looking for blood, they actually do make a lot more sense. Of course, only those in good standing with the organization that runs Ophelius get to feed there, hence the need for the black cards. Apparently Hector had fallen out of the organization's good graces. You know, I can't for the life of me imagine why. I'm still not sure what he hoped to gain by showing up here and causing a scene like that. Maybe he was just desperate. Maybe he thought he could stick it to the powers that be. Maybe this was all just an elaborate suicide attempt. Who's to say? Either way, the management has taken steps to ensure that this kind of mess never happens again. There have been some new adjustments to the rules, let's say. Now, if we have a problem guest, instead of just messaging them, we also message Persephone and we message Brenda downstairs. Brenda, yeah. That's the name of the giant nightmare spider woman in the basement. Turns out that she's the bouncer, and if a problem guest makes it down the stairs, she's been given more freedom to make an example out of them if need be. Now, on one hand, I think that the policy is a little draconian, but on the other hand, after what I've been through, I can't really argue with it. And in the end, it really isn't my world down there. It's theirs. I don't need to understand it. My job is just to keep the drinks coming, and that's exactly what I intend to do.